The long-term objective of this particular farm is I ultimately plan on growing out kind of an extensive food forest, you might call it. And as part of that, I've constructed these beds here that you're seeing. These are what are called air prune beds. It's not a traditional raised bed. It's used for tree growing and other perennials where if you want to start these plants, you want to make sure that as they're growing out as seedlings, they don't get root bound in a pot with spiraling roots and things, because that basically guarantees that they'll have a poor root structure for their whole lives. So if you plant something in a pot like this, the taproot will come down, it'll hit the bottom, and it'll start to spiral around the bottom. And that creates this really gnarled, tangled root system. What an air prune bed does is it looks like a regular grow bed, but on the bottom there's actually wire mesh or hardware cloth. What happens is, this right here I believe is a hickory. It'll send down a taproot. That taproot will go all the way down to the bottom to that wire mesh. Once it hits the air, it'll self-prune. And once that tip prunes off, then it's just like when you cut the tip of a branch, the lateral buds start to branch out. The same thing happens with roots. You cut the tip of that taproot off, and then you get a whole bunch of lateral branching of the roots. And instead of being a round pot like this with a hard bottom where the roots will spiral once they hit the bottom, instead, with this air prune bed, it's nice and large, it's got a lot of space. The lateral roots can branch out without the risk of spiraling. So this air prune bed, you can plant plants in high density. Right here we have a whole bunch of black locust seedlings that I started growing about 2 months ago. And then you can separate out those seedlings into individual plants that you can then plant out into the field, or you can heal them in for winter or whatever. You just do that when they're dormant. You separate those out into their own separate individual plants to be able to plant out. In this setup that I have, I've got quite a few different species that I'm growing. So this is pecan here, so I've got some pecan trees growing. This is hickory, and I've got black locust. Over there I have Ribes aureum, which is golden currant. Over here, that's sycamore, that's mulberry, and then in the far bed there, that is Maclura pomifera, or Osage Orange. And that's what I'd like to focus on for this video. I'd like to focus on some of its properties and also what I'm doing to propagate it from seed. So, in case you're wondering, this black netting that you see on top here, I put this on because I have a bunch of chickens that they climbed into these beds and they started kicking soil around and destroying some of my seedlings. So I had to put this on to deter the chickens. Anyway, so over here you can see some of those Osage Orange seedlings, and I've got some more growing here. So these are some of my new seedlings that are just now emerging. There's 14 of them so far, and I expect quite a few more to pop up in this particular area of the grow bed. So my previous experiment was a bit of a fail. I put a bunch of these on a cookie sheet, covered them with a wet napkin. I was thinking, let me try sprouting these without trying to cold stratify them. I assumed that they had already been in cold temperatures beforehand, before I received them, and that therefore I may not need to cold stratify them. I thought maybe I could just sprout them. But I was reading, and it turns out that cold stratification has to be a moist stratification. It can't be a dry stratification. So here, these seeds have all been dried so that they'll last longer. I read that the seeds, if they're dried out, then when you put them in the fridge, they will last much longer than if you don't dry them out. But I also read that that cold stratification step requires that the seeds are moist, so if you put them in when they're dry, then the clock hasn't really started on the cold stratification. So now I have to redo this. Another thing I noticed is that the seeds are kind of molding. So what I noticed about these is that these seeds have actually started molding even before I moisten them with water. So this, there's an example right here. I'm not sure how well you can see it, but it's got mold growing on it. I'm not sure if that's superficial or not, because these come from a fruit, and so it may just be the fruit that's rotting around the seed, and it may not be the seed rotting itself. But I assume it's not good for the seed to be in a rotting shell. So I'm going to kind of pick these out. Maybe I'll do a separate experiment where I try and sprout these moldy ones, despite them being a little bit moldy on the outside. I'm also picking out these little stray bits of stuff here, little bits of fruit and extra random, junk, because I assume that may mold as well. So that's kind of what I'm working on right now. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put these into the napkin, moisten them, put them into this plastic bag, and I'll stick those in the fridge. So the fridge is going to do two things. First of all, these will be moist, so the cold stratification will actually start, because it'll be a moist cold stratification. The second thing is that it will reduce the mold. The mold won't grow as quickly if it's cold than if it's warm. So that's the second objective there. So just a little update, and I'll do this on each of the seed types that I did before, and then I'll update once I've done that. This is my next round of Osage Orange seeds that I'm going to try and prep and plant. So this is basically, it's a fresh set of seeds from a fresh supplier. The last seeds I got, a lot of them were moldy. You can see some of these actually have mold as well. So you can see a little bit of mold there. I think that's just a little bit of surface mold where there was some fruit stuck to the surface and that fruit molded. So I think the seed in here is probably fine, but I'm going to throw it out anyway. But yeah, so I've got these set up on this paper towel here, this napkin. I picked through I got all the little debris out, and also took out seeds that have mold on them. The rest of these, some of them look more viable than others. Some of them have like cuts and things that make me think the seed may not be viable, but I'm just going to leave them in there as long as they're not moldy. And I'll go ahead and cover this up, and I'll wet this down, and then I'll stick this in a paper towel, stick it in the fridge. And according to the stratification recommendations from the package, it says cold stratify for 30 days. So I'll go ahead and stratify these and then plant them out about 30 days from now. I planted both batches of seed on July 31st, so that's about a 23-day cold stratification for one packet of seeds, and it was about 11 plus, so about a 42, 43 day cold stratification for the other bag of seeds. You can see here the relative location of where I planted them within that air prune bed, and to either side of those seeds there's other seeds of different species like mulberry, currants, and things like that. You can see to some extent in this photo why it was that I chose to do another batch. The first batch that I did is on the bottom there, and you can see a whole bunch of mold and stuff that's kind of leached through that paper towel that they were in, whereas the batch above in the photo is much cleaner, and so that was that mold issue that I was speaking of. And definitely the second batch turned out a whole lot cleaner, but we'll see over time whether it actually produces more seedlings or not. So here are the results of my Osage Orange growing. You can see these are the seedlings here. These have been in the ground the longest. These seeds were planted without any cold stratification at all. And you'll see there's, decent amount of germination. I planted probably, 100, 150 or so. And I got about 15 that germinated. So I'm not entirely sure how good of germination that is, but it's usable at least. The seed is very cheap, so to have a low germination rate is not necessarily hard on the budget. It's just time-wise and effort-wise and energy-wise. That's where the real value comes in optimizing your germination. So you'll notice here there's a big hole where there's no seedlings coming up. I think I mentioned earlier in the video, this is where a chicken came in and destroyed a bunch of things. They also kicked around the soil, and so notice that I have some Osage Orange growing here. I also have one growing here. I have one growing here. And there might be another one around here, somewhere around these sycamores. But that's because the chicken came in and just destroyed a bunch of this stuff. Anyway, so, it's fine germination. It's nothing too impressive, but it's usable. Over here, these are still in progress. These are the seeds that I showed earlier in the video. And so basically from here up, those are the seeds that were cold stratified from July 8th through the 31st. And then from here down, these are the seeds that were cold stratified from June 20th through July 31st. And so far I'm seeing a little bit better germination in this batch of seedlings. This was the cleaner seed where I made sure to get as much mold and debris and stuff out of the seeds before I cold stratified. These down here were the moldier seeds. So that may be part of what's going on, is that the mold may have inhibited some of them from germinating. So compared to the seeds where I didn't cold stratify and I just put them straight into the soil, I don't necessarily see a huge difference in germination. And so I think the cold stratification step may be optional for the seeds that I have, which is nice because that reduces a lot of time in terms of, I don't have to cold stratify for 30 days and then plant. I can just plant them straight into the soil and they can get started germinating right away. So you can see the plants are all quite healthy and I'm super happy with how they're coming along. And yeah, between the two beds, I've got, at this point, 29 different Osage Orange plants that are coming up. And then I expect more to germinate from this bed. And, I expect in this bed, given the germination that I've seen so far, I expect this bed will have about maybe something on the order of 20 to 30 seedlings that germinate here. So that's what I have going on so far with my Osage Orange.